Not everything happens for a reason, but sacred gifts may be found in everything that happens, even and especially in the most painful things. That's a quote from the newly published Amazon bestseller titled Not Another Self-Help Book, Finding Gifts in the Midst of Life's Shit by today's guest, Lindsey Kane Leaverton, where she bravely shares her personal journey through grief, loss, trauma, and navigating life's challenges with resilience and humor. A multifaceted individual, Lindsay serves as the director of wealth management at a boutique financial firm in Austin. She has 7 recorded albums under her belt, is a self-taught guitarist and vocalist, a mother of 3, an animal lover, new author, and the list goes on. Beyond her professional pursuits, she has a strong sense of faith, a vibrant personality, and not so secretly dreams of pursuing a career as a stand-up comedian someday. I am so thrilled for this conversation. Welcome to the Grief and Light podcast, Lindsay.
Thank you, Nina. I appreciate that. That was a lot of words that you had to say. I'm sorry that the bio was that long. Oh, man,
There's a lot to you. You truly are multifaceted like a gem. This is why your story is so fascinating and beautiful. It's going to be so helpful to so many. Congratulations on the book launch, and thank you for writing it. I know that at the beginning it starts like I actually did this thing,
Yeah,
So thank you
I'm
for
still
doing the
surprised.
thing.
It is my pleasure. I don't even feel like I had a choice. You know, when something is so intensely inside you, you have to get it out. Otherwise, I don't even know what I would have done. So, yep, it's here. It's out into the universe, which is a little terrifying.
I absolutely love that you really talk about the gift. Initially, I went into it apprehensively because I said,
Mm,
oh, it's one of these like turn your pain into purpose no matter what. And, we
hmm
deal with grief and loss. And sometimes that could sound so jarring, especially after, when somebody's in the middle of the chaos and the disaster surrounding them. But I was pleasantly surprised. I loved the way that you shared your story. And man, it is stories, really. Before we dig into that, I want to talk about something super important. How was the Elephant Rescue Center or Elephant Sanctuary?
Oh my gosh, it was unbelievable. I got to take a selfie with 3 elephant asses, which is just not something I thought I would ever be able to say in my life. My kids had so much fun. These are 3 rescue elephants. They're Asian elephants, and we got to bathe them. And one of my kids did hula hoop with the elephant. It was so fun.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Amazing. Yeah, you shared it on social media and I saw that they even got to bathe an elephant. That was pretty amazing. And that's something that will stay with them forever.
I hope so. I really do. Yeah, they were so hairy. The elephants, not my kids. They were
Like,
just so, actually, my kids are hairy too, but all fuzzy all around.
all the fuzzy good things in life. It looked beautiful. So thank you for sharing that aspect as well. I know that your story started many, many years ago. Specifically, what I gather from reading your book is that it's a reconciliation of who a person is on the inside with the life experiences that they're faced with on the outside. And those could look very different for everybody, but through your lived experience, we get to see how somebody has managed to integrate and heal and move forward in what would otherwise be very challenging circumstances. So why don't we start at the beginning, the part where you realized that the inside wasn't matching the outside?
Yeah, that's a great question. Before I answer that, if you don't mind, I just wanted to thank you for your authenticity of saying I was kind of apprehensive going with this book. That's why I chose the title, right? Not another self-help book, because I even included in the book, if you're in the midst of one of these tragedies or loss, every chapter is the gift of something. So the gift of
Right.
loss, trauma, conflict, as you know, because you read it, but telling the reader, this may be too soon. This might not be the right time to read this particular chapter on heartbreak if you just went through a divorce or something like that. So thank you for that feedback. I hate when I hear people tell people that have been through a great loss, everything happens for a reason. You'll
Right.
be fine someday. I mean, people are well-meaning, they're trying to help, but most of the times that type of language hurts. So that's why I wanted to flip that on its head. And not everything happens for a reason. Sometimes shit just happens.
And you do give a
Okay.
fair warning in the introduction. So for all the listeners, that, you do spell it out in the beginning. And that is something I love about the book, that it's, hey, if you're not ready, just go on to the next part.
Yep. Yeah. I'd say to your question about the insides matching the outsides, I love the way that you phrased that. I would have to say, growing up in a conservative evangelical Christian home, was at church pretty much anytime the doors were open. In high school, started leading worship and singing at church and in choir, writing songs. And then when I went to college, locally and then regionally and then eventually nationally, kept recording, like you said, 7 albums, and became, I wasn't famous in the contemporary Christian world, but it's a small world. So, people know people in that industry, and it became very clear to me that that wasn't going to work out very long because I knew that I was gay. And I came out to myself when I was 17. That's when I really had the self-awareness that that's what the thing was. I didn't know how to explain it when I was little, but looking back, it is woven into the fabric of who I am and how I was created. And so I went on a multi-year journey starting at 17, and I started ex-gay therapy and reparative therapy, did everything in my power to pray the gay away. And I just wanted, to not disappoint God. I had this very dogmatic, strict way that I viewed things. And I thought, I guess I just was created wrong, or, hopefully, God can rescue me from what I called same-sex attraction, my struggle. I saw it as a sin, and heck, I didn't want to go to hell. I hate being hot. Like, I live in Texas, and I hate being hot. So I'm like, no, can't do that.
I'm in Florida. I get
Oh
it.
my God, yes. So that journey led me to where I did not want to be here anymore. When I was a junior in college, I just could not imagine living one more day with this secret nobody knew except my counselor at the time. And I started to get gut level honest about, who am I? What does God actually think about my sexuality? Which is kind of a weird thing to say. God, higher power, source, love, intelligence, the universe. I use all those interchangeably in the book. It's important to me to have a very open-minded faith. So regardless of what people call their God, I knew that I had probably missed something. I had listened to my Sunday school teachers and pastors and faith community, and I didn't really ever get down to the root. And what are these supposed Bible verses that claim that homosexuality is a sin? What do those really mean? Like, what do those verses mean in the original language that the Bible was written, the original context, those sort of things? So that started another multi-year journey of reconciling my faith with my sexuality. And that led to me and my partner at the time coming out. And we started by telling her parents, because they were these like pot smoking cool hippies. So we thought, and they were not religious at all. So we thought, this is going to be great. We'll have somewhere to go for the holidays. Because my parents are were at the time very conservative, evangelical. I didn't know how they would respond. And the opposite ended up happening. My then partner's mom just kind of freaked out, and slowly and methodically over a few weeks outed me, I guess you could say, and called my dad at his office to tell him. I didn't even get to come out to my own parents. Called the bigwigs at a big organization that I was the worship leader for, told them. So within about 3 weeks, I went from thinking I was going to have this slow, intentional coming out process and still having bookings about a year and a half out, to being unemployed, and me and my partner at the time just sitting in our condo thinking, wait, what the hell just happened? And that was the great loss, where I felt so much freedom. It was one of those rare moments where joy and sorrow are just inextricably linked. And I'm sitting there looking at the end of my career, the death of a dream. That's all I'd ever done. But also, I was so free. And it was like I could breathe for the first time. And that was really felt like kind of the first day of the rest of my life.
Grief is usually associated with the death of a person, but the reality is that grief is more commonly experienced through these lived experiences. And it just sounds like that was something that was ongoing, maybe, an undercurrent throughout all of these experiences. And I'm sorry that you didn't have the agency you wanted in the way that all of this went about. But I'm glad to hear that at some point, it's like you say, it coexisted, the sorrow and the joy. I always say grief is not this or that, it's this and that. It's like a Venn diagram, you're living in the and it just seems like life thrusted you into that messy middle where you're like, all right, well, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
And for context, I want to highlight that you were in a very conservative religious environment where you shared a lot of the values in terms of your God and your faith and your beliefs. So to then find yourself in a place where you're not accepted by this community, there's a lot of grief in that, because then you start questioning, a person starts questioning, like, well, what's wrong with me? And how come I can't be accepted when to my understanding, you led groups, you're a very active participant, your music was a part of the community. So to lose all of that in 2009, tell us about all the internal things that were going on at that time.
Oh my goodness. I love that you talk about the both and. That's how I live my life, because I used to be either or, black and white. I know everything about everything. It's like, oh, I don't know anything about anything. I know some things, but not a lot of things. I think for me, there was not only the grief of the death of a dream and just being unemployed and then going to work at a seafood restaurant where I was cleaning up breadcrumbs off the carpet for less than minimum wage. There were also the death of several very important relationships. I lost 99% of my friends, and I am quite a social person. Even though I'm a outgoing introvert, I love my friends, and I lost quite a bit of family. My brother and I didn't speak for 5 years, and he was one of my best friends. I had uncles and aunts that would not let me come into their house for a gathering after my granddad's funeral. And so the loss was so compounded, because it wasn't just the one loss. It was the whole house of cards came crashing down. And then it was almost like every day was another something, Yeah. And so I struggled, but I also had so much resilience. That was a long time ago. Now I'm 41. So that was in 2009. And I remember leaning on my faith, because that's all I had. My identity was gone. I had built this, wonderful career and ministry. And I appreciate you saying how you were sorry, that I didn't have the agency to come out like I wanted. But I will say, I would not have it any other way. I'm super grateful now, looking back, that it happened exactly like it did, because I'm not sure if I could have walked away. I don't know if I could have said, no, or canceled all those gigs. Knowing me, I probably would have done them and then just continued to go downhill in this downward spiral, because sometimes I'd have to go up on stage and sing a song after a speaker gave an anti-gay talk. And I'd have to go up and almost co-sign that bullshit by singing the song afterwards. So I'm grateful it happened, because it just, instead of a Band-Aid ripping off, it was like a guillotine, and it was quick and it was shocking, and it all happened at once. And I'm here for that. I would rather that happen than the long drawn out multi-year process. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what I was thinking.
It feels like there was a point of no return, and you said, okay, well, this is it. Like, this is where I get to build my new foundation and figure out where I go from here. And that you did.
Yes.
And I love that. One of my favorite chapters, I think it's the gift of rejection, which, in reading all of them, just to give the listeners an overview, there's the gift of fear, addiction, anger, humiliation, tragedy. I'm going to read them all. Rejection, unanswered prayers, waiting, trauma, leaving, loss, powerlessness, heartbreak, emptiness, conflict, and pain. And it really is powerful the way that you broke these down, because a few elements on the technical side, each chapter it's something that a reader can digest on its own. Let's say fear doesn't resonate at the time, but maybe trauma does, or loss does, or powerlessness, right? So you can read the book, not necessarily in chronological order, and still get the message that you need to receive at that moment. There were others that stood out to me initially, but I feel like the one that really surprised me was the one about rejection. I'm not trying to give too much away, but there was a point where you were auditioning, and you had all these what you call green lights. You kept going to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and that happens to so many of us. Like, there's things that we really want in life. I'm trying to speak in general terms so I don't give everything away, but there's things that we really want in life. There's moments where life confirms and affirms, yes, you're on the right path, you're going. Yes, we get our hopes up. We're like, yes, this is about to happen. And then it doesn't. It reminds me of what you just said about ripping the Band-Aid off. You have this one scenario in your life where this Band-Aid was ripped off one way. And then another pivotal moment where you just had to figure out, okay, what's next? Again, that loss of dream. So talk a little bit about that, as much as you want to say, or as little as you want to say.
Oh, I'm all about spoiler alerts. Look, there is so much in this book, and I know you can attest to that. It is dense.
Yeah.
It is jam-packed of all the things. Coloring book pages, 16 original songs, lots of stories, anecdotes, all of that. I don't have any problem telling you whatever you want to know. I can't say the name of the TV show because of legal documents that I signed, and I would really love to not get sued. So we'll just be general, but
No fun. Yeah.
it was crazy. I just kept getting open doors and green lights, and you pass through this level and now you're on to the next stage in the process. And being a part of things that I had seen on this show, and really it was just kind of all arrows were pointing to going to a specific city where the next part of the show would happen. And gosh, I had a vision. I mean, I would dream about it. It just seemed like, oh my gosh, I think this is going to happen. Not that I was going to win, but I mean, I wouldn't. My kids thought I was going to
Who
win.
knows?
They're like, you're
Yeah.
going to win the whole thing. I'm like, y'all need to lower your expectations. But just even to get to where I did get, felt super confident. And then it didn't. And I remember it's almost like you're in a wreck and you're like, wait, what? I was just going down this road and now I'm not going down the road anymore. And people can relate to that. There's multiple times in my life where I've thought I've met the one. This is the one. We're going to grow old together, have visions and dreams about this person being there at my deathbed. Confident, I would put all my money on it, and then it doesn't pan out. So what I have come to realize, and what has changed the way that I see the shit that continues to come, because that's life, right? Life is going to keep on lifing. I love to say that because it will. But I can look back and not find the gifts just so that I do this bypass of toxic positivity. Like, oh, this happened, but like it all worked out, so it's fine. It's not about that for me. It's about giving some purpose to the rejection in this case. And as I looked back, so much started really kind of blowing up in my family that if I would have gotten to that next round, it would have been really, really bad. I didn't know that at the time. I couldn't see that at the time. But looking back, I could have never made that happen and been there for my kids the way I desperately needed to during that time.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And it's been different life experiences, even in the beginning, like you said, taking it way back to the beginning. I believe that when you were trying to pray the gay away and do all this therapy and all these other things, which at the time you understood yourself to be the right, quote unquote, right thing to do. And you really genuinely tried to do, because that was your belief that, I don't want to go to a hot place afterwards. You were at the time engaged to a man to be married, and you realized at one point, I can't do this because this is not who I am. So that realization in a way kickstarted everything else. Could you talk a little bit about that?
It really did. First of all, I love that you read the book. I'm doing this podcast tour, so I've gotten to be on a lot of great podcasts, but you can tell the hosts that have read the book, right? And just kind of skimmed it to get enough questions. So I really appreciate that.
It was great. It really, really was really good.
That
Yeah.
makes me so happy. Well, I remember sitting on the couch. I can see it like it was yesterday. You know, when you have those definitive moments, they're just etched in your mind. And
Yeah, I call
I
them the nine
remember,
eleven moments.
oh,
Like,
wow,
where were you on
yeah.
9/11? Yeah.
Yes, yes. That is so smart and so right. And I can still see the couch I was sitting on. So
Yeah.
I'm on the couch. My male fiance, who, a good Christian man, loved me. It would not have been good if I married him for a variety of reasons, but we were engaged. We had our wedding date, dress, bridesmaids dresses,
Ready
invitations,
to
the whole
go.
nine. Ready to go, ready to just, you know, I thought if I can just trap myself in a marriage, that will give God time to change me and to heal me from this, issue or whatever the case may be. And what's scary about that, Nina, is that I like to think of myself as somewhat intelligent. Now, I'm a dumb blonde in a lot of ways, but intelligent, where I question things. I don't just believe things. I just believed it hook, line, and sinker. Because in my faith growing up, you could not question.
Right.
Punished or disciplined if you questioned anything. It was just have faith. That's the way it is. What's wrong with you? So I'm sitting there. My fiance is on my right. My best friend, who is a female, is on my left, and we are watching a movie. I'm holding my fiance's hand. But you ever had a really intense crush on someone and an attraction to somebody? You know what you feel in your body. And
Right.
I just wanted to be holding her hand. And this was, after at least 4 or 5 years of
Well,
consistent ex-gay therapy, fasting once a week, so that if I had an impure thought, I would pray to be made straight. I would not eat for an entire day once a week, which
yeah.
is crazy. I did just about anything. I lived in the sorority house for 2 years. And when I would go into the communal bathroom, I would put my head down
You're just
so
like,
that
I'm
I
not
wouldn't
looking.
see and be tempted. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I had this feeling, it was so strong and it crushed me. And I went to bed that night and I was just bawling on my floor upstairs. Again, I can see the carpet. I can almost like feel it and smell it when you think about this moment. And I was bawling the snot and the really
Yeah.
intense crying. And I just said, God, please take me in my sleep or wake me up straight. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
I can't, I won't, I cannot do this anymore. Something's got to give. And the only way I saw out was to die. And if I would have had some way to do that, I may have tried that night, to be perfectly honest with you.
I'm
But
so
the best I
sorry.
could, thank you. You're so sweet. I'm so glad that I'm still here because that's the
Yeah.
only time I've really not seen a way out, which has given me a lot of empathy for folks that see suicide as the only way out. But I prayed that prayer and I was just begging, like, please, I can't do it another day. Not another day. I was in love with my best friend. Did not feel anything for my fiance. And the next morning, I woke up still gay.
Nothing's changed.
And nothing's changed. If anything, I was gayer because, the more you try to fight something, the more that you tend to want it.
What you resist
Um,
persists.
there, exactly. You got all the good little phrases today, girl. And that was the day when I had a decision to make. I can either keep going down this road, which does not like fit. It was not aligning with my spirit or my soul. I was getting sick. My body was just cratering. Or I can start getting curious. And I didn't know where this path would lead me. It could have led me to where I believed even more that being gay is a sin. So that was that start of that years long process that I talked about a little earlier, figuring out what did I miss? I've missed something because I know that the way that I feel, that love is the most pure form of expression. And how can that, something so innate to my being, how can that be something that means I've got to live a life of loneliness, of misery, because I was just born liking people that were my same gender. And that wasn't the God that I had come to have a relationship with. It didn't stand up anymore. And it was a long process. It was not easy. But eventually, after so many years and fighting it, slowly I realized, oh my gosh, not only is this okay, this is an integral part of me. And it's beautiful. And it is a superpower. That's how I see it now.
Definitely. I love that two things. Throughout the book, you always prayed. You always hung on to your prayer. That was your communication. It feels like that was always a constant throughout your life, no matter what, even in the times when you doubted, because the doubt inevitably creeps in, especially when we're like, okay, well, my faith, I'm here, but everything else keeps falling apart. So, what's going on here? So in those moments, it's completely understandable. And then the second is I love, love, love that you said you leaned into your curiosity, because when life is messy and when life is chaotic and weird, the brain is trying to figure out how to make sense of this so it can create predictability and stability and safety, and it cannot, because we're entering an unknown. Leaning into curiosity is such a powerful tool, and that is something that you talk about throughout your book, and I feel like that is a key for grievers, for people experiencing trauma, for anybody going through a difficult time. You can speak to this, but in reading your book, I feel like that was a big window through which you could find the hope and the meaning in all of these different life experiences.
Yeah, it was. I wish it was an easy button. I wish that it always worked.
Right.
But most of my own personal trials and struggles and moments of loss and trauma, and I don't use that term lightly, trauma and tragedy, most of it, as I was able to get a little bit of distance from it, that's when I was able to get more curious and think, what gifts can I find? Not to make that tragedy go away or fix anything, just hey, I can hold the really shitty thing that happened and also maybe something good came out of it. And that's where that curiosity comes in. But what's important to note, I would say, is there are some things that no matter how curious you get about it, there is no silver lining. There are no gifts or treasures that you can see, and you may never see it. When I actually wrote that chapter, the Russian-Ukraine war had just started, and you're seeing these images of these little Ukrainian babies. And I guarantee you, I could sit in a room all day long and get curious about that situation. Why is it happening? Are there gifts that come out of it? Nope. That's just one of those ones where I'm like, no, this is just a horrible, horrible thing. And maybe people out there have some good that's come of it or what. But to me, that's where my brain just kind of broke. And there are certain things that I don't get curious about. School shootings is another one.
That's a big one.
It's just these horrible things happen. There's no magic deity causing it or allowing it, which is just another side of the coin of causing it. So I love curiosity as long as we have that caveat of some things are just going to happen and they're horrible.
There's so much nuance to navigating trauma and grief. And thank you for saying you don't use trauma lightly. I feel like it is overused these days, and people who actually experience trauma and PTSD are in a way becoming disenfranchised because everybody's been watering down that word. So thank you
Oh
for.
my gosh. Yes,
Yeah.
they're like, oh, I have PTSD because I had lettuce in my sandwich at Panera Bread, or it was traumatic on the way to work today in traffic. I'm like, let's
No.
let's let's not let's not be okay with that. Let's really use those words, especially PTSD. We're talking about a legit diagnosis. So,
Right.
yeah, I would encourage anyone listening, just kind of check yourself on using those terms unless you actually have PTSD.
Right. And the actual symptoms, if once we look into it, we realize, no, we really don't have most of us really don't have PTSD the way that
Hmm.
it's actually diagnosed. And one example, I don't know how much we can touch on this, but one example, I think it was Brian's story. So when we were talking about the nuance of things happen for a reason versus there's certain losses and certain tragedies that really don't make sense. So I don't know how much you want to touch on that, because again, I don't want to give away the book, but you experienced this situation when you were younger in a camp where a big tragedy happened, and you tried for a very long time to make sense out of that, and you just couldn't. And yet it helped you save somebody down the line.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That was, I mean, I was 17 and a group of boys was swimming toward the cabin that I was the counselor of. Our cabins were on water,
Mm.
and they started pretending like they were drowning. And one of the boys went under. And I thought, oh my gosh, the boy who cried wolf, is this a thing? And it was long enough to where I just jumped in because, I didn't want to chance it. And if it was a joke, at least I knew I jumped in. Couldn't find him, could not, could not save him. And he ended up passing away, drowning. And I thought it was my fault, and that's a lot to have as a 17-year-old. And I prayed and prayed. I've never prayed harder to this day than in that moment. And I believed that he would miraculously come back to life. My faith back then was the faith of Lazarus and,
Yeah.
resurrection and miracles. And so I just knew. And then when they pulled him out of the cabin and he was in a body bag, I still had faith, which is a little crazy now that I think about it, but I still had faith. And I almost couldn't believe it when they did pronounce him that he had passed away. And that broke my faith. It absolutely broke it. And, as you read the book, you'll read more about that, but it changed everything. I no longer thought that there was this, God that was like a Santa Claus. I just give him my gifts, my wish list, and then I get it if I have enough faith and I pray hard enough. That's just not life. And so that in and of itself is a whole nother story. But to relate it to the gift, because of that trauma and that tragedy, I had full on PTSD. I couldn't be around really water, anyone swimming for quite a while. And about 5 years ago, I was at a kid's birthday party, and anytime people are in the water, I mean, I'm obsessive.
Yeah.
And I've done some work, I've done some EMDR, I've done a lot of therapy, so it's much easier. I can be in the pool, I can even have fun, but I do not take my eyes off the people swimming who I think might have some trouble. So all the parents were talking and having a good time, and I see this little boy, and he's probably 4. You know how pools have steps? Well, he was just walking, and then he didn't know there was a huge drop that just went in. So I'm watching him out of the corner of my eye. Everyone's talking, cutting up. Kids are, having a fun. And I just see him, and I'm like, I'm going to keep my eye on him. I would have never done that or thought twice about that if what happened when I was 17 didn't happen. And he went right under, and he could not swim. And thankfully I was pretty close, because as he's walking, I'm looking at him. I'm probably maybe 10 yards away from him. I get closer. He goes under, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I just, go right in and scoop him up, and crisis averted, right? Am I saying that I saved his life and that if it wasn't for me and my trauma from 17, he would have drowned? I have no idea. That's not really the point to me.
Right.
The point was that something that was so tragic in my life was able to really help me respond differently in that situation. And I got to meet the boy's family. Somehow I was able to get connected to his family. I did not know this boy. I didn't know his name until later, but his family invited me to the funeral. That was really, really hard. Meeting his mom, meeting his sister. But there was this moment where his mom just like hugged me and like buried me in her arms and just said, thank you. I'm so grateful that I get to look into the eyes of the person who last saw my son. And
Wow.
that brought her some peace. I don't know how. I have no idea how those things work, but there was just enough of those little nuggets, those gifts, those treasures that really redeemed that tragedy for me.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a very, very powerful story. And it's holding that nuance. I feel like that story exemplifies what holding the nuance of some things really don't have an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also the reason that you were more alert than everybody else in that other scenario many, many years later. So one thing does not negate the other, and it helps save a life, right? Not your experience helps save a life. No, I'm not going to say the death, right? So nuance, right? You have to choose your words carefully with these things because it is so gray and it's never going to make sense. And I do understand this mother when my brother died, I was the last person that FaceTimed him. So I was so grateful. I was like, oh my God, I got to see his face. I got to see his face right before, we didn't know he was going to die 2 hours later, but at least being able to capture those last moments becomes so awkwardly precious in this context of loss, that I completely understand why she said that, and the fact that you were there. And you've been a witness to so many people's stories and what I call little miracles, actually big miracles in life, some divine intervention, some divine communications throughout your life, and times when you question your faith, and when everything came crashing down, you asked for certain signs and those were delivered. And I kind of don't want to share that story because it is beautiful and I want the readers to really, really enjoy. I'm referring to the one on the plane.
Oh yeah,
And
I
I
know exactly what. Yeah, I was like, we can't
Oh
spoil
my
that
God.
story. That's my, yeah, that saved my life. That saved my life.
Yeah. That story was so very powerful. What I would love for listeners to understand is that this book encompasses so many different aspects of difficult, challenging, traumatic, and griefy experiences of loss. And it shows what can actually come out of that, how we transmute those experiences, how we integrate, how we reintegrate, and how we can live our aligned, authentic life, even after loss and challenges and everything. I also love the way that it's written because you call it an experience. I've heard you refer to the book as an experience, and that is exactly what it is. Tell us a little bit about what went into it in terms of how you wrote it, what elements you added. You touched on this earlier, but go a little bit more in depth about how you thought about this, how you built this book, and why you did it the way you did it.
Great question. I love that question. But before I go into that, I'm just really sorry about your brother. What is his name?
Joseph.
Joseph.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm glad that you got to see him on FaceTime for sure. So with the book, my brain is very different and a little bit strange. I was just recently diagnosed as on the spectrum about a year ago, which was very interesting. It's like, oh,
that makes sense.
Everything makes sense. So I started working on the book about 4 years ago, and I'd been writing for the book for years prior to that, but had not compiled it into any type of book format. But at the beginning of COVID, it just became really clear during a meditation I was doing that it's time to write the book. There was almost an urgency and there was no choice. It was like, oh, we are doing this. I had no idea what it was going to end up looking like. I had never written a book. I do money management and financial planning, and I tell you what, I just started writing, and I got this huge whiteboard. The publishing company said they'd never seen an author do this before, which I thought was so interesting because to me it just made sense. I get this huge whiteboard and it's in my garage, and I start mapping out what I want to include, what different stories I wanted to include. Schitt's Creek quotes. I start every chapter with either a quote from Schitt's Creek, Ted Lasso, Moira, exactly, Parks and Rec, and then what are the gifts, and starting to tie together this web of, I wish you could see the whiteboard. It looked like a Beautiful Mind. You remember that movie? And then Rain Man got together and had a baby and then put it on a whiteboard.
Tell me you have a picture.
I do. I don't have it readily accessible, but I do. I should post that. That's interesting. Once I had built out that framework, then it was about just writing and filling in those pockets that had already been primed. And I wanted the book to be a journey for the reader. I didn't want it to be just another book that you pick up, you maybe read a little bit of it, and then it collects dust on your shelf. Or maybe you read the whole book really fast, but you don't really give it time to settle. You don't really give the seed time to be planted, water it, and grow. So I wanted it to be multimedia, meaning I wanted to incorporate some things that I love and that have helped me heal, which is adult coloring book pages, because I love doodling, I love coloring. I'm like a big kid. And then it is so relaxing. And also music. And then I curated like a 6.5 hour Spotify playlist. So I wanted it to really surround the reader. So when they finish, let's say chapter 1, I don't want them to go straight into chapter 2. In between every chapter, I put a QR code that takes the reader to one of my original songs. So there's 16 songs in there, some old where I listen to it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I sound like I'm 12. And then some that I just recorded a few months before I turned everything into the publisher. And then I created these adult coloring book pages, and they're random. It's like a sloth, and it just says like keep your shit together or whatever. They're just kind of fun. But that gives the reader a different angle to absorb the information. Because, like I said, it's dense. So as you're coloring, as you're doodling, as you're listening to the song and coloring, whatever the case may be, there's this settling that happens. Your brain starts changing because you're not just, reading it here, it's really making its way down however many inches that is into your heart. Right. I love turning things on their head. That's my most fun thing. So even with the endorsements, the publishing company was like, reach out to all these famous authors. I'm like, look, I don't know anybody that's famous. I know like one person that's famous, and I don't have time. And they're all going to say no because I'm a no-name author. And so I took a page out of Tina Fey's playbook. I didn't make this up. I've got to give her the credit. And her endorsements were just kind of funny. And I think she had like an elementary school best friend who wrote something. So I put in there an endorsement from my parents, an endorsement from my kids. Of course, they're like, bruh, what's for dinner?
Yeah.
And then like my old crotchety neighbors, like, I'll read the book when you start putting your damn trash cans back behind your house before 2 weeks after trash day. I like things that feel different. I like things that feel like novelty and make you go like this, kind of tilt your head to the side and be like, huh. The biggest compliment readers can give me is, I will never see blank the same. Like, that's my favorite. Just looking at something a little bit differently can make such a difference.
That is very true. You infuse your sense of humor throughout the whole book. It gives us a glimpse of who you are as an author, of your life experiences, how you process everything. And also it takes these very potentially heavy and dense topics that could be very overwhelming to people and makes them, dare I say, enjoyable. Like, it's enjoyable to read what you wrote. And trust me, I've read a lot of books from people who had their horrible experiences, and it starts weighing heavy on the reader if it's very detailed and very dense to get through, because as is life, and it could be very dense sometimes and very heavy. But I love the way that you did it. You give the reader a pause. You give the reader context. You give the reader personality. I feel like you have your friend telling you a story and you're like, really? Oh my gosh. And that happened? What?
Yeah, that's what I wanted. Yeah. Like having cocktails with a girlfriend.
Yes. And yet you're dealing with very important, life-changing, finding meaning type of topics that will help many people navigate very complex situations. So I think it's brilliant the way that you wrote it. I love that you incorporated so many different elements. I love the songs. The music is beautiful. It's so, relaxing. It gets to you, like Gift of Addiction, for example, that song, I teared up listening to it. And that's not the title of the song. That's the title of the chapter. And the song tied to that chapter, that particular song, was very touching. And it was just really, really powerful. So thank you for sharing, all of you. Thank you for, bringing this gift to light. There was one excerpt here I'd like to read from I See You in Your Pain. This was so powerful. If with your permission, I will read it very short. Okay.
Please.
It says, I see you in your pain. I can't perfectly empathize with your exact pain because all pain is unique to the person experiencing it, but I still see you. I've been down a similar road. I walked in similar shoes. I've been in a similar storm, but maybe in a different ocean. And that was so powerful because in loss and grief and all of these life experiences, even though we're not the only person going through XYZ, divorce, loss of a loved one, loss of identity, loss of dreams, that's a big one. Even though we're not the only person going through this, the experience is unique to each one of us. But the most powerful thing we can do, and one of the reasons perhaps you wrote this book, definitely the reason I created this podcast and the reason I like to connect with other people, I'm not going to speak for anybody. I want to make sure that people feel seen, heard, and witnessed. Mm-hmm. And I got that sense from your book. That part really stood out to me. I feel like you didn't just share your story, you really care about bringing light into the world. And that is very felt through your book. So thank you for that.
Thank you. You are like making my day. I seriously appreciate it. And I receive all of that. That's why I did it. Life is so heavy. There is so much overwhelm. And if the book or a chapter or something that's funny, something that just temporarily makes you chuckle, man, we all need a little relief. We just need a little relief. And
Yeah.
I love that you connected with it.
Truly. Like you said, lives. And even though you've overcome all these things, there's other things to deal with. There's other things on our plates at any given moment. These tools are very powerful. So thank you. Before we close out, please tell the listeners where they can follow you, where they can get your book, and any other projects you may be working on or anything you're excited about in the coming weeks or months.
Ooh, okay. Stalk me, stalk me. Notanotherselfhelpbook.com. That's going to be the best place to go. Throw your email in there. I don't do spam. I literally do a monthly newsletter where I highlight the podcast and highlight a gift and usually tell an anecdotal story. But that's the best way to keep in touch with me. You know, if Instagram ever went away, it's like, well, I want to be able to still have my community. So go there, and then that'll have all the links to buy it on Amazon. And you can, get it wherever books are available. The audiobook should be coming out in a couple of months. I read it myself, so that was really fun because I get to give tone to the different, especially the humor, of it being in my own voice. So notanotherselfhelpbook.com, and then what else? Instagram, Lindsey Kane Leaverton, just my full name, all lowercase. I'm on Facebook too. I'm not really on Twitter because I just can't. I don't know. I just can't do it. Or X, whatever it's called. And what am I most excited about? The project. I'm in the midst of this interview series called She's a Lot because I've heard that my whole life. So I thought that would be a fun title. So every month I'm releasing an interview with a badass woman, and we talk about certain concepts that relate to the book and, talking about these amazing people finding their own gifts in the midst of their own shit. So the interview series, I'm really excited. We released January and February, and those were just so exciting. So I'd say that is what I'm most excited about right now.
Awesome. And you have some fun stories on your Instagram, so go check her out. I will link all of this in the show notes if you want to follow. I want to thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your work. I'll close out with this. What would Lindsay today tell Lindsay at age 17?
That's such a good question. Hold on. Don't give up before the miracle. Just it's not always going to feel this way. You're not always going to feel this way. And there is light, and you are so loved, and you are so perfect just the way you are, and never lose sight of your faith. That encompasses it, I think. And thank you so much for letting me come on this podcast. Thank you for what you're doing. It's so important to the world, and thanks to all that are listening or watching.
It's an honor. Thank you so much, Lindsay.